So Will, just to repeat your introduction, you're a
Sure.
4 or 5 teacher in the Toronto
Yeah,
District School Board. And
that that's correct. Yes, I'm a grade 4 or 5 teacher in the Toronto School Board. I've been teaching for this will be my 10th year, and yeah, I attended the disability studies program. I think it was 2006 to around 2010, and through the learning through the disability studies, just to understand the perspective and to bring my lived experience based on where I was within sort of the learning, and to really just challenge my my bias and privilege and where I sort of sit within the disabilities. And so I thought it's laid a great foundation. The program is amazing. I think about it often, and you guys are definitely in for a real treat. Those that have been attending or just enrolled.
thanks, Will. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about where you are right now?
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul, he, him pronouns. I always do that just for everyone to know. I am in my, oh Lord, 12th year of teaching, I think. I did the disability studies degree in 2009 is when I graduated, then teachers college, then master's right after that, and now I'm doing my doctorate as well. I teach in York Region, in Woodbridge, Valora Woods Public School, grade 8. Happy to help anyone that needs help going into teaching, references, what you should take, and also when you finish the application process to school boards is a doozy as well.
Thanks, Paul. I'm sure people will follow up on some of those offers. I'm going to just move into our next question. Can you tell us a little bit, Will, about the program, the teachers training program you did, and how you entered the field of education?
Yeah, sure. So I applied for, I guess the advice is you apply for many Bachelor of Education programs. So when I was doing when I applied for the Bachelor of Education program, it was 1 year. I understand that it's now 2 years. It's connected to I think a MED or, so when I applied to many of the Bachelor of Education program. And when I applied to York, I applied to University of Toronto, OISE, I think OUIT, which is like the technology university now out in Oshawa. And one particular program that I was interested in was I did the inner city option program. And I'm not sure if it's still around, but it was predominantly working in underprivileged, I guess, areas within the city of Toronto. And for me personally, that was close to home because I grew up in public housing. I grew up, with family on social assistance. So I didn't have a lot growing up. And I essentially kind of put myself through school. So I did the inner city because it was a way for me to give back, but also I believed in the social justice. I believed in equity, and those are lenses that really I think the disability studies program really helped me to look at and to challenge. And so like Paul said, you apply for as many as you can afford because there are a cost to each of the applications, and find out what are your values, what are things that are important to you, and what are the programs that you are applying for, thinking of what are their missions, visions, and values, and what are do they coincide with what you what's important to you. So that was my journey. And yes, there is a process, there's deadlines and resumes and all that. But I think I had a lot of experience through the disability studies program, through doing the developmental service worker program at Humber, and my experience, as a program supervisor. I think all that was foundational in terms of me applying. But I'll stop there and we can continue.
That's great. Thanks, Will. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about your journey? It was a little different, a little bit different, I think.
Um, a little different because I didn't know if I wanted to do primary junior. So for everyone, a little background. Primary junior, that's kindergarten to grade 6. And then if you want to teach high school, that's intermediate senior, that's grade 8 all the way to 12, depending on if you're in York Region or Toronto. Also, I wanted to apologize about my video. For some reason, my camera's not working. It's been off all summer, so that's probably why. But going back, I had to get some courses, electives, um, outside of the disability studies to balance what York University and U of T and UOIT were looking for. So I did a music course and I did another social work course, which really helped along with the disability study courses. And then I also found volunteering in Ryerson and also other places helped because it's not only the courses that you need, you also have to have some volunteer experience because that's also what people are looking for. So I started pretty early with the help of Esther and Paris, probably right after, what was it, 501 was the first summer intensive back then? Yes. And they helped me and they guided me as to what courses to take and when to volunteer. And it's all about time management as well. But I got into York for primary junior. That's what I did. I am teaching grade 8 now, but that's a whole different story.
Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
So when I got my permanent position 12 years ago, it was primary and junior. And then I found that it was special ed and I was teaching grade 7 and 8 as well, a little bit. And I just had to take one extra course to get qualified for intermediate. And the course was $500. And then our union gave us a discount. So it ended up being $400 just to qualify. So I'm primary, junior, intermediate qualified. So that's kindergarten to grade 10. So it was just one extra course, which then helped alleviate. And then my journey is probably into admin within the next 2 years.
And by admin, can you, maybe most people know.
Vice principal. Sorry. The vice principal role should be within the next 2 years, just so we can have more vice principals focused on special education because there is not a lot there.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And Will, in your journey, you started off in the with this specialty in the inner city program. I wonder if you can talk about, like, if you saw any connections with the disability studies program.
Yeah, so I think, and I do want to certainly acknowledge Paul. Paul certainly helped me out a lot, and yes, you know, just to echo what Paul was saying in terms of Esther and Paris helping us out with the course selection and really what we needed. So just to continue what you were saying, Esther. So my background actually, when before I got into the disability studies program, I actually did the developmental service worker program at Humber. And I was working with students with various exceptionalities. I had the opportunity to work at Barron Oak, and they're kind of like a treatment program. And then I got to work at a Toronto school, which is Lucy McCormick. And they were supporting students with different exceptionalities and all that. And currently, I do have my specialist in special ed. I do have primary, junior, and intermediate, so up to grade 10, like Paul, as well. And when I was in the disability studies program, I found because of the teaching that I received in terms of perspective, right? Because, you know, as an able white man, privileged, I was able to really take the perspective with me and bring that over into my education, like into the school board. So the disability program really laid a foundation just in terms of partnership, right? So sort of being an ally, being an advocate, looking at sort of my own bias and really giving me, I would say, the humility to have a different perspective, right? Because it wasn't just about teaching, it wasn't just about, but it was like, how can I learn from the students that I'm interacting? Just as when I was in the disability studies program, how can I learn from my colleagues? How can I learn from my fellow, classmates within and their different perspectives? So I think it really gave me more awareness in terms of my own position as an educator. And like Paul was saying, like, to get into admin, and that's, my goal as well, but to be able to help facilitate different perspectives in special ed, right? Where having more advocacy, I think that's very important because sometimes it is overlooked.
Mhm. Mhm. Great. That's great. I know that um, I know that we could get into the nitty gritty of applying, and I suspect that some of the questions will come to that.
Esther, could I jump in for a sec?
Sure.
I'm not sure how many of you have taken any of the courses right now, but I'm going to say in York Region, disability studies would be highly valuable for those going into teaching, only because the education system itself is very, and I'm going to be very blunt here, flawed, and it's a medical model based. So that means we are keen on diagnosing and treatment rather than looking at outside barriers. So even if a child is struggling, you're looking at psychoeducational assessment psychology right away. So that's why I encourage everyone to go through that is thinking of teaching to go apply.
Mhm. I know that we talked last year about this, and my apologies to people who were in that session as well, but I think there's a lot of new people here with us tonight. I remember there was some discussion about the way that school boards tend to hire people with a background in disability studies because they're so keen to have teachers with a background in special education. So of course, disability studies is not special education, but I wondered if you could comment a little bit about your experience in working in special education after having, um, after completing a disability studies program.
Will, do you want to go first?
I thought you were doing a great job, but I would love, yeah. So if you don't mind, Paul, or I can go, but I would just say that yes, in terms of the medical model and sort of looking at the psychological aspect, because in terms of looking at different models, and certainly we've looked at many in the disability studies program, but even just in education, looking at it like a biopsychosocial model or quick to diagnose, right? But really looking at it systemically in terms of like external barriers, right? And I know that there's a lot of, anti-programming going on within the school boards and different lenses and things like that. And I would say it having the disability studies program, I believe it's very, it gives you an advantage because you do gain the perspective that you probably wouldn't get if you were doing another program. And what was communicated to me, or what was sort of the sort of talk is, if you're applying to teachers college, or you want to get into a school board, then you should have at least special ed part 1, right? And so it was sort of like, to your advantage. But I think having the disability studies program is far beyond just even having a special ed part 1. But because this is so foundational, and even as Esther mentioned to you, it's not necessarily special education per se, but you do gain a different, I think in the disability studies program, you challenge a lot of bias. You challenge your own, we sort of unpack a lot of things that would not necessarily be talked about in other programs. So I don't know, Paul, if I'm making sense a little bit, but you can add on to that.
I really can't. I think Will answered it for me. So thanks, Will.
You guys,
No worries.
a story of how you saw your perspective making a difference in your work.
I can do one today.
Okay.
I know schools haven't started. They don't start until the 7th, but I went in because I was off for the summer and I wanted to talk to the teachers who had the grade 8s before and just get their perspectives. And then they started saying, this child is going through the process of assessment. This child is going to probably have a learning disability. This child is struggling. This child, this child, this child. And that went for about 10 of the 27 kids. And that is after, I wouldn't say the bias of teaching, but after a while, that is, a lot of people do get jaded and that's what they believe. However, with the disability studies program, it teaches you to look at the social model and see what's other things that are happening. So one of the children I found out is his parents work in the restaurant industry, so he can't have any support at home. So he's basically watching his younger siblings and also trying to learn at the same time. So it's impossible basically for him to be doing schoolwork. And then it's a constant cycle where you're always trying to catch up. So just having those conversations with teachers, those courageous conversations, which you learn to have in the disability studies program. I believe it was back then Catherine Frazie's course about looking at the barriers and looking at what causes the barriers. Even something as simple as whenever I go to a building, I test the all access button to see if it works. And half of the time it doesn't. Oh, Carolyn has a question.
Great.
Hi, my name is Caroline. I'm trying to unmute my phone. I've got a quick question. You state that that disability studies or the background of it is necessary or needed in the school system. My quick question is, how much are people willing, especially the older teachers, willing to listen to younger younger people that have the background, that have just been educated in it, coming into the school system? How easy are they able to be accepted and their suggestions suggested when coming into the school system as a new teacher?
For me personally, I was willing to have those courageous conversations and difficult conversations and challenging conversations. It does take a little bit, and you won't get everyone on board, but you will get most of people on board. It won't be instant. It'll take a while, and I found that when students share their perspectives, also it helps. If that makes sense, Carol. Is it Carolyn or Caroline?
Either one is fine. Thank you. Yes, that's great. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, like, absolutely. I think when you go in, just like any profession, whether it's education, whether it's business, you will have different perspectives, right? But I think going in and, with sincerity and putting students first and giving students the voice and sort of building allyship and building trust, right? So again, it's the partnership, right? Not sort of going in arrogantly, but bringing in your learning and perspective, because there's so much richness to different different perspectives, right? And so, again, forging the partnership, and it's about the student, right? And as Paul said, right, the barriers, right, and looking at just how to remove those, right, in order to the student to be successful, or the parent to get the supports that they might not have had access because of whatever barriers were in front of them, right? And as we talk, I can talk more because I did all online last year, and I had 6 different schools with students across the GTA. But we can talk more.
Thank
The other
you.
thing, Caroline, sorry, I'm going to say is just to add on to Will's point. I'm trying to think of another way to say this, but I can't. So unfortunately, my language here won't be the best. But you don't want to go guns a-blazing right in if you hear something, but it's just having those conversations. So like today, I just spoke to a teacher about, instead of calling it a master key because of anti-Black racism, why don't we just call it a all access key? Just changing the wording.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Right. Okay. That makes sense. And then at least then, as you're right, your tone definitely changes a heart if you don't come in arrogantly, if you just say, why don't we look at something like this, as opposed to, I think you're wrong.
Exactly.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Looks like Aisha has a question as well.
Hi, how are you? My name is Aisha. I'm in disability studies program. I'm still a student. I have diploma in early childhood education, and I have experience in education also. Still, I'm feeling that I'm interested in to be a teacher in a primary school. So, what is the best way to be a teacher? So who can guide me to be a teacher? I want to complete my program, and I want to be a teacher.
Yeah, I think that those are definitely achievable goals. I think you already have a great foundation in terms of your education. I think the more you're, certainly finish the disability studies program, right? I think that, that will certainly, build a strong foundation. And I think look for some mentors, right? So maybe at your, if you have children or something, like you can certainly be a part of like a parent council, or get to know, people at your local schools. And it's about networking, right? It's about, volunteering. I did a lot of volunteering as well. I think, I switched careers at 35. I was I did the disability studies program part-time, and I think it took me 4 or 5 years, but I was working as well. And then I was doing volunteer work. I think taking the initiative, and that's going to help, right? Not waiting for someone to come to you, but to go to them, right? So let it be known to people of what your goals are, and building those relationships and helping people to support you along your journey. And certainly Esther and Paris and Dwayne and whoever's within your core group that you're connecting with, I think that will help you.
Aisha, or is it Aisha? Sorry, I'm big on names.
Yeah, Aisha. This is Aisha.
Aisha, Because of your background in early childhood education, I'm gonna assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, you want to teach probably kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's true. Yeah.
So I would look into the primary junior. I'll write that here because each teacher's college program has something different. And then I would also continue that networking like Will said. And the other thing is, because you're applying to a teacher's college, there is a minimum grade point average of, back then it was 70%, but you wanted a little more. But I would focus on the primary junior for the Bachelor of Education. And it also depends on which school board and area you are thinking of eventually applying to. So I know in York region, we're focusing a lot on cultural teachings and special education as well. I'm not really sure about TDSB. I know Peel is now starting the cultural responsive pedagogy, and also Indigenous FNMI, such as the land acknowledgement, which Esther just read. So thank you for that earlier.
Thank you.
I'd like to just say, I thought that advice to have a good sense of what programs you might be interested in, what kind of teacher education programs you might be interested in, and what grades you might ultimately like to teach, are that advice to think about that early on in your program of study while you're here in the School of Disability Studies is a really important piece of advice. Because one of the things that Paris and I noticed, and Paris can speak to this much better than I can, is that every program has its own requirements. So I know that in this last year, one of the graduates, Angela Mota, wanted to teach intermediate senior. And we haven't had many graduates who've been able to finish our program and then go directly into the intermediate senior program of teacher education training. But in fact, Angela was accepted at Western with social sciences. So disability studies counted as a teachable. And it's not called a teachable. What's it called? A concentration or a specialized?
No, it's a teachable.
Teachable. Anyway, as her social side. So disability studies, her disability studies courses counted towards that concentration or that teachable for her. She also had English, and she ended up actually taking extra English courses so that she could teach both disability studies and English. So she was accepted into Western, and ironically, she ended up going to Will Laurier. She ended up going somewhere very different. But it just shows you that you sort of need to plan it well ahead, because it's quite a few courses you need in order to get the to be able to apply for some teacher training programs, or certainly to apply to the intermediate senior programs. But having said that, I remember from last year that Paul reassured students that if you go into get your Bachelor of Education, your Master's of Education, and you've gone into the primary junior or junior intermediate, it's fairly straightforward to be able to upgrade your training so that you can teach at the high school level. Am I right about that, Paul?
Yep, it's additional basic qualification you would take. The one that most people often take is phys ed or a social sciences, family studies. And then you're qualified to teach high school, but really, who wants to teach high school?
Right. Well, that is another question for sure.
Yeah, and just to add for the prerequisites again with the different Bachelor of Education programs, certainly, yeah, they'll require certain courses, but as Paul was saying that, but once you sort of get into a teacher's college, there are additional qualification courses you can take if you so desire to teach high school, because I did the First Nations Métis Inuit intermediate, and so I could teach up to grade 10 just with that course. Right. So there are different ways, right? It just depends in terms of what your goals are. But as Esther was saying, it's good that you plan early and look at what are these courses that you need, because you don't want to get into a position where the deadline is approaching to applying, and then all of a sudden you need these additional courses, which might take a semester or two.
Aisha, I think Will is talking about the intermediate senior. So that's grades 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You have to take specific courses because you need 2 teachables. So if I wanted to teach English, for example, in high school right away, I would, well, junior you don't, but if you want to do intermediate or senior, if I wanted to teach English, for example, in high school, I have to take 3 or 4 English classes at Ryerson in order to have that teachable.
That's correct. Yeah, you definitely need two sets of teachables for sure, as Paul mentioned.
Primary, junior, I only did the courses from the disability studies and then the electives. So there was no teachable. I got my teachable to teach grade 7, 8 later. So kindergarten to grade 6 is what I went to teachers college for. I thought I would want to do kindergarten grade 1. Nope. 7, 8.
Right.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Paris, are you keeping an eye on the chat? I wonder if there are questions there.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat. No questions. I think Paul is doing a very good job of answering all the questions, and same with Will. Thank
Well,
you.
as soon as I start to think of one, you're coming up with the answers. That's for sure. I guess I would add for students that there are many programs across the province, and that it can be tempting, especially if you live in the GTA, to think about GTA programs, or if you live, I guess, in another part of the province, to think about your local programs. But students have had really good experiences. Moving just a little bit further afield, we've had students find success at Lakehead, at Wilfrid Laurier, at Western, at U of T, at York, at Brock. So there's lots of places that you can go. And think Ottawa. I'm trying to remember if it's Ottawa or Carleton. I know it was in Ottawa. So there are some very good options for students.
I know I'm jumping. Sorry, Esther.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I also know there's a Australian university in Toronto. So I kept my options open. So I applied to U of T, York, University of Ontario Institute of Technology, but I also applied to Australia, which was based in Toronto, and they do the placements in Toronto, so it was distance. And then I also applied to Medaille in New York, which is kind of like the disability studies program, well, back then, where the courses were online, but you did weekends there, just to keep the options open. And I know teachers who I work with who graduated from Medaille or Queensland University in Australia, and they never left the province. They just did there's a lot of different universities, as Esther was saying, that offer teachers education programs.
Yeah, I think there's Queens as well in Kingston, and yes, I have a couple colleagues who are graduates from Medaille, and they're teaching in the Toronto board. So yeah, lots of options, right? Again, going to those programs, going to those websites, and certainly with the help of Esther and Paris and Dwayne or whatnot, like in terms of just looking at what are some of the prerequisites, you know, what do they require? And again, what is their lens, right? Like, what do you value? Like, what are you going to benefit from this program? But what can you also bring, right? Because certainly your experience and what you bring to the Bachelor of Education program, you know, might be a great addition. So keep that in mind.
Okay. Just of the students who are here, who's actually in their close to final year and is thinking of applying this year? Are there any hands up?
Yeah, I was gonna say, just raise your hand in the reaction little box.
Or maybe we're getting people more. Okay,
I see one.
Taylor is.
I
Okay,
will be next year, Nicole says, 2024.
okay. And Taylor and Nicole, Taylor, I realize you can't type in, but do you have a sense of where you're applying and what you're hoping, what grades you're hoping to teach?
I'm thinking of like Queens or Trent or Ontario Tech, and I want to do like primary, like
Nice.
grade, I think JK to 6, I think it is.
Yep.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. And Nicole, do you have a sense? Maybe Nicole will type it in. Maybe while Nicole is typing, I think it's also, you know, another thing to bear in mind is that people use their bachelor, their master's of education to then move on into other fields of study that may not be directly teaching, but may be somehow related to working in the education system. So we have had students pursue training or careers in instructional design, in educational technology. We've had students actually move into teaching at the post-secondary level, particularly in community colleges. And students like take a teaching degree and then move into training in the private sector. So there's very different ways you can sort of scaffold up from a disability studies diploma, your degree in disability studies, into all the kinds of different career pathways by pursuing education afterwards.
Nicole replied, she mentions that my goal is kindergarten to 3 and hopefully Western. Her end goal is learning support teacher.
Okay, great, great.
Yeah, Esther, I think what you touched on is very important, because I know for myself, I did think about the pathway to get the master's and then the PhD and to go into community college and teaching in that route, where you can sort of teach a course, let's say at a community college with your qualifications. But I also know that even big corporations like Procter and Gamble and stuff, they do hire teachers or teachers that have different backgrounds, and thinking about, let's say you talked about design. So if you, let's say, decide to get some certificate in, let's say, architectural or something like that, with the foundation of the disability studies, and you're designing, you know, whether it's buildings or you know, even in engineering, you have that perspective. So you're going in with a different lens, right? In terms of universal design really in making things accessible. And I think that's important too. So there's lots of foundational things that the disability studies program gives you. So not even, certainly, whether it be community college or getting into teaching, there are different ventures that you can do.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Could I just respond to Nicole and Taylor for a minute, Esther? Sorry,
Yeah.
I know my hand's not up. Taylor, I just looked at Trent. I think you said you were applying to Trent. So Trent, there's 2 different programs, and for everyone here, there's 2 different programs. So you want to apply to the consecutive, not the concurrent, because the concurrent means you're doing another degree at the same time. Consecutive means you have a degree, and you're just doing the teacher's college portion of it. The other thing, Nicole and Taylor, is, and I forgot to mention this, towards this time is when I started drafting my letter of intent or statement of experience. And I know Trent and I know Western, because I just looked at Western, is also a requirement, is a statement of experience. So who are you? What will you bring into our program? Why you? So drafting that and then having others look at it. And I did it like 15 times. It provides that lens, and that is a big component of all the applications for teachers colleges. The statement which Will had talked about earlier, and I remember talking to Will about this when he was applying to teachers college way back when. And why you? So just highlighting also all of the disability studies aspects that you've learned. And even when I did it, I highlighted it was called not a thesis. Esther, help me out. Will?
Oh, the DST 99,
Yes.
the independent study.
Yes, highlighting the independent study and what I did there as well.
So when you have to do the letter of intent, do you hand it in as you apply, or is it after you're accepted, or how does that letter work?
It's an application requirement. So they look at the transcripts, the letter of intent, or the statement, and sometimes they ask for a resume or statement of experience. So it's actually in conjunction with the application.
Yeah, the
That's
letter
perfect, thank you.
Yeah, the letter of intent is so you definitely want to spend a lot of time on that. And I think, again, like as Paul mentioned, it's sort of the build up in terms of what you've acquired in various programs, what you can bring based on your experience, your volunteer, things that you learned, how you can add value to not necessarily their program, but they're looking to see what you sort of bring to sort of enrich the whole learning experience. And so I think that's important. And the earlier you do that and get, those, colleagues of yours, or certainly Esther or Paris, to sort of review that. And then that will be sort of a part of the package, right? And some bachelor ed programs, might weigh on that more heavily than others, but usually they sort of want to sort of know a little bit about you.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
I think if you know alumni too, grads who've been through the whole process, like Will and Paul, but there are many others, and they're willing to offer you some feedback, that's a great asset, because I think they also are very strategic. I remember one of the speakers last year talked about all the changes, and this goes back to Caroline's question. She had lots of ideas when she started her position, and if I'm remembering this right, she worked in a contained classroom.
Yeah.
And she, so she, found herself, she said, as an EA for many years, she was very critical of how the teachers were working. And then she found herself as a teacher, but recognized that her influence was still somewhat limited, and she had to make change slowly. So she had lots of ideas for how to transform that classroom when she started. But she gave everyone in the session lots of advice about how to take it kind of softly and slowly and kind of get your changes, the kind of transformation you're trying to make in very small ways. And then in the end, you can make really big differences for your students. But it's about understanding sort of how to work the institution. And I think alumni who are working in the education system have a lot of wisdom to share with you that you can start to integrate right into that letter of intent. And so many of you have worked in the education system as educational assistants that you have to value and honor your experience, and also show that you're open to learning new things and occupying a different position within the education system. So it's really, I can't like validate what Paul is saying, and Paul and Will are saying enough. Like 15 times, 15 different people review your letter and take all the advice open-heartedly. But I think somebody has their hand up.
Aisha?
Yeah, I have a comment about the disability studies program. So as a student, sometimes our graduation is delayed because
You think I cut out? Or?
yes, you can hear me?
No.
Yeah, so as we cannot graduate because we in the same year, because we cannot take in the same year DST 88 and 99. So a lot of students are taking one course, and which is I think 99, and their graduation is delayed for 1 year because of one course. I hear that this system will change. So is that true, or is it change, or no?
We are working towards changing that. Will it change while you're in the like, I don't know that it would impact you. This is a question that Paul and Will cannot answer. But it is a change that I'm not sure will impact you, I'm afraid. You're correct. Like, the fastest you can get through the program is in about 2 years plus a term. That's if you enrolled in the summer. So
Could I
Yeah,
take a little bit of this on, Esther?
I'm going to pause for a second. Sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I did it in 3 years. I did 88, and then the year after I did 99. And I think that really helped because 88 is a proposal-based course, which helps you cement what you're going to be doing for your final 99. And 99 back then was a whole year-long course.
Yeah, and it still is that. And I guess there will be some changes. It will not impact all the people in this session, though. And there will be some losses with those changes. Right now, our students are positioned really well because of that 99, that full year 99 course. It's really helpful to students as they move forward in ways that you can't anticipate and that you don't even see in your first couple of years after graduation. But we also appreciate that students are wanting to get through the program much faster, so we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think I was trailing behind Paul. Certainly, Paul was a mentor and sort of helped out. And Aisha, just as you're thinking strategically how I can finish the program as quickly as possible, we too were strategizing and looking. Okay, we can combine this course, and we'll take this one, and we'll put them together and do that. But I think even if there is a semester gap or 2 semesters, look at, can you volunteer? Is there things that you can do in between that will prepare you even more? So don't look at it as a waste of time or empty space, but look at it as, okay, how can I have an opportunity to do something else, whether it's volunteer, can I, obviously if you're in a position, is there an additional course I can take, or is there, can I network during this time? So I know we want to sort of finish as quickly as possible, and you'll get there, but look at sort of, don't see it sort of as gaps or a barrier, but look at it as opportunities in terms of how you can continue to upgrade.
That's a great point, Will, and I remember this. The other thing is, and I'm not sure how many of you are doing this or thinking of this, but I did my master's in education in 88, and 99 helped cement that. So having that 88 first, and then taking that time to do 99, and then having that time, it helped cement the master's, because otherwise I feel like if 88 was one semester and then 99 was one semester, I would be lost in my master's program, because you still have to do, I had to do a master's thesis and qualitative and quantitative research courses. And if I was lost there, then I'd be even more lost in my doctorate.
Yeah.
It's just the other side of if you're going into teaching or if you're going to continue on into other education.
Yeah. And I know for people who are hoping to who go into teaching and want to ultimately become curriculum planners or department heads or go into administration, think about yourself as a vice principal someday, where you can actually make quite a bit of change. Having a graduate degree, having a master's of education is really an asset. And that's one thing that the program prepares you for really well. So, but I do hear the concerns around the speed at which you can get through the program. Maybe, Aisha, we can help you problem solve that in another discussion. Actually, you raised a good point, and while we have a little bit more time, Paul and Will, can you talk about the differences between the Bachelor of Education and the Masters of Education? Many of our grads go on to do a Masters of Education, and how's that different?
Paul, I'm not there yet, but you can speak on that. But if you can speak on that, I'm not there, but I am going to be taking my principal course soon, and I can kind of just from my perspective weigh in. But go ahead, Paul, if you're able to.
Principal course, waste of time. That's all I'm going to say. Bachelor of Education is the foundations. So there's a course on literacy, there's a course on math, there's a course on, unfortunately, I did mine through York in Durham. So there was a course on special ed / racism / cultural responsive pedagogy / sexism / all the isms. It was just one course in the bachelor's. In the master's, you can specialize further, and I did it in U of T, Social Justice and Education Studies in Education, focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder and what the media representations of the term crazy with returning soldiers is, and the negative implications on families. In the bachelor's, it's just foundational courses. Unfortunately, you got to do it. Unit planning, all of that lovely stuff, but the master's is more higher order, higher level thinking.
Yeah, as Paul mentioned that, I think, yeah, so the Bachelor of Education is foundational. And I think probably one of the biggest takeaways that I got from the Bachelor of Education program is the actual placements, right? So it depends on what Bachelor of Education program you participate in and how their placements are set up. I know I did it at U of T, and I think we had 3 different placements at different schools. And so already, if you're thinking about doing a Master's of Education program, as Paul did, and you can specialize in different, I think there's a Master's of Education in Technology, there's a Master's of Education in Equity, or like certain pedagogies or different isms and things like that. So probably be thinking about that. And again, these are things that you may see as just, maybe you have a niece or a nephew, maybe they're in the education system, or maybe you see gaps and you think, wow, like Esther said, like if I'm going to do a master's program and I want to get into, let's say, admin down the road, where can I make the most change? Where are these barriers? Where are these gaps, right? So not to promote my startup, but there's a reason why we've created our startup, right? Because we see gaps in certain areas, right? And we value certain things in terms of student achievement. But if certainly equity as a teacher is essential, right? In the different lens, but when you get to sort of a master's, or let's say a PhD, it's more specialized, where you're actually zooming in terms of what you're looking at. And then you'll probably do case studies, and you'll do like inquiry and things like that.
Is there anyone here thinking about a master's? Might as well just ask. Okay.
And I would just encourage you, like myself and Paul, like we've been in your position, right? So everyone starts somewhere. So I think certainly if you have questions, we're here to, answer, or if you have questions, you can, certainly put them to Paris and Esther or Dwayne, and certainly we can respond through an email or something, right? So, if you think about something after, sorry, Esther, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Not at all.
Caroline had raised Caroline's hand. So.
Yes, Caroline did raise her hand, but I was thinking of a master's. That's why I raised my hand.
Master's in education.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
You know what's Caroline, I think that's a good goal and ambition. Like I was thinking about the master's, and Paul, principal course, waste of time, whatever. I don't know if it's prerequisite. I got to look more into that. But what I was going to do my master's in was actually health and administration. Something different, not necessarily in education, right? So with a master's in health and administration, you can actually be you could be administrator for hospitals. So it gives a different perspective, right? Because lots of people have their master's in education. And I read I don't peer reviews or something like that. It just brings a different lens. So when you're thinking about it, because if you really think about it, sometimes principals or let's say associate directors and stuff, not all of them necessarily have their and that's the thing. I think, Paul, maybe you can correct me, but I think there are certain bills that were being challenged in terms of principals coming in sort of as business administrators, as opposed to sort of having the education background. So I think it's good to have both different perspectives. Certainly having some core education, like Bachelor of Education, is essential. But when you're going up to a master's, look at how can this sort of benefit a board or school, right, that has a different perspective? Because certainly you can, saturate a board or a system with certain ideologies, but if you have something different, it brings new perspective. So that's, I think that's just important to keep in mind, and certainly what you value.
How do I'm sorry, I didn't put my hand up, but how do I how do I put what I have as a as a master's in something other than education forward, that it's like, oh, that's something that's an eye opener. Like, I mean, if I had a master's in music, that would be something, oh, well, we need musicians in the school. We need music teachers. That's something like, but if you're looking at something like masters in design or projects or whatever, like to me, I'm thinking that may be so out of the box that nobody's going to look at that and say, yeah, we need something like that in our education system.
But going into that critical lens, it's what you can do with that master's. So a master's in design, off the top of my head, oh, you're great. You can do art or in elementary, primary, junior, or you can do design, technology, or construction in high school. So it depends on, again, what you want to do with it. And then master's in design, oh, I can work at IBM because I know people who have a master's in education or a master's in design working at IBM, leading team meetings, or Microsoft.
And you know what, Paul, so Caroline, I think certainly you need to understand where the board's going, what are they valuing at those times, right? Because the board shifts, right, based on, let's say, their models, based on like their 5-year plans, right, their learning initiatives. Like as Paul mentioned, for example, with technology, you have a lot of enterprise going on. So for example, IBM, Google, a lot of these ed tech companies, where you having that background as administrator, you're very valuable, especially with the online learning that took place in the last 2.5 years. Because certain principals had certain background roles, they were able to sort of oversee these central roles because of their background. They might have had a business background, they might have had some design or some sort of technology. So there is more bridging sometimes than we think there's not, because immediately we just think education, masters in education, where it's just, more literacy and numeracy, which is true, which is great, right? But for example, if you had a certificate in coding or programming, like that is valuable, right? Mm-hmm. Because with the new math curriculum, to be able to help kids code, like even at York University, there's a program called Tech Life, and they actually came into many of the schools and they did programming for the students, right? And so these sort of initiatives, so you as a teacher or background and you learning how to use a program Scratch or these other things, they're very beneficial. But I would have, you have to, it's always timing, right? Even for me, I haven't really looked at a Bachelor of Education program in a while because I've been sort of out of that space. But it'd be interesting to see what they're asking for right now, or different boards and where they're going. So I think it's always just being in the know and looking at trends, and not trends that are going to fade, but foundational. Like health is always going to be around, right? And things like that. So looking at those things that will not only benefit the student, but the whole system. So, sorry, I felt like I went on a little bit, sorry.
I think in the last few minutes we have, Paris, I'm just going to look to you, and I'm not sure if Dwayne's dropped out of the meeting or if he's still here.
He's
Yeah.
here.
Okay, great, perfect. I wondered if either of you thought that there were any questions that should absolutely get covered.
I think this was a very informative session. Thank you, Will and Paul. I think the only thing probably I would ask of you is, I think that students are looking more towards what are some of the courses for teachables. So can you suggest some, like, I mean, actually you guys have just mentioned the areas, you know, technology, all that kind of stuff, but what are, I mean, again, and I always do tell students, and which you have also covered, is to contact the teachers college that they want to apply to see exactly what the criterias are. And I have suggested in terms of, I think primary, junior, if there's a teachable that they need, they can focus that in their liberal studies, because they still need 1 lower and 3 upper, so that's 4 concentrated courses. So it could be all in English or geography or history. So are we still headed in that direction in terms of the teachables?
So for primary, junior, for applying to Teachers College, there is no teachable, but I would recommend taking a course in the arts or English, because they do ask what kind of courses do you have and how and what experience you have. I was just on York and U of T, and they're saying in your statement of experience, how do you have the English course? How do you have the arts course? How do you have the music experience? Because that's what everyone is looking for. In terms of high school, Angela, that'd be someone from years past. So Esther, Paris, or even Will, because I didn't do high school and never looked into it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
so
looking, oh, sorry, I'm just looking now to see what it is. It's, it's 6 courses. And a course, I think a course is it a full course? Is it a full year or is it a half course?
Half.
Okay, so it's 10 courses for your first teachable. So this is a place like Western. It's 10 courses for your first teachable and 6 for your second teachable. So for someone like Angela, what she did is she did 10 social studies teachables, and that was her family studies and her disability studies. And actually she went for, it was family studies / social studies. So she took family studies, social studies, or disability studies. Maybe she had a psych course in there as well that fit as a social studies course. And then she had to do 6 English courses. So every one of her liberal studies was an English course. Plus she did like equivalent to open elective English course. She took 1 other additional course on top of her courses as an English course, so that she could make the 6 English courses for her second teachable. But then Western tells you what your teachables can be. We have another student, Stephanie Chambers, another grad, Stephanie Chambers, who did something similar, but she used French as her second teachable. And I like, they were offering her jobs within the first month of being in her Bachelor of Ed program, because at the time she graduated, she had such a lovely package. They were really looking for French teachers, and they just were so grateful to find anybody with experience in disability.
They still are.
Yeah. So
yeah, that would.
courses together.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you combine, because like for the grade 4 to 10, right, in terms of certainly French is an asset, music, math, as Paul mentioned earlier, health and physical education, and then certainly if you're doing like the grade 7 to 12, than perhaps maybe like the English, the science, the biology. It just depends, right? I do have one colleague of mine. He teaches high school, and he teaches history. So it depends, right? And this is where you got to kind of think a little ahead and think to yourself, okay, so where do I see myself in 5 years, and what do I want? Especially if you want to do like the intermediate senior, right, which is 7 to grade 12, or you just want to do the grade 4 to 10. Like I always knew that I wanted to do primary, and I didn't have a lot of teachables, but I have, with my diploma program in the disability studies, I had a lot of experience, and so I was able to seamlessly make that transition, because even when I got into the board, because of my experience and all that, I was able to even move up on a different level quickly, and I didn't have to take additional courses. So really, but ask to, right? Say, I have this course through my college program or my university degree program, or I've taken the certificate, can it count, right? So you have to ask, and I know Paris, you helped me a lot with that, can it count, right? Because sometimes even though it might not be here, or you have this ask, because sometimes they might make an exception, so you don't have to take that additional course.
Mhm.
Just to kind of cut, and sorry, just looking at the time, it's 8:25, and I see a few students kind of saying, see you later. So
Okay.
just be mindful of the time, that's all.
Okay. Well, this might be a good time to wrap it up. Will and Paul, I am very thankful to you both for joining us again. Dwayne, I wonder if you have any last words?
Esther, was there anyone who had any pressing questions? Sorry.
I don't think I saw a hand. I know that Paris is keeping her eye on the
Yeah, and
chat.
there's nothing in the chat.
Little bit of a quieter group this time round, but yes, thank you so much for your contributions tonight. It's always interesting to hear about your experiences, and I'm sure some of the students who've been very reflective and thoughtful tonight may reach out to ask for some more advice.
Yeah, not a problem. And certainly I'd love to visit you guys. So if there's an opportunity, right, that I get, I certainly can swing by, right, and sort of ask those additional questions, right? However, you guys arrange that or whatnot, certainly.
We may just do that. We may take you up on the offer and
Yeah, I'd love to.
I'd
love to come and visit you and bring you guys some donuts or something.
Great.
Yeah, no, it'd be awesome. But yeah, certainly, right. I think as the year kind of goes on, if like people are in those positions where they want to ask questions, right? Because I think it's good to sort of build the toolbox early.
If it's in an evening, yes, I can come, but I don't think I could do a day, only because of working during the day.
Yes.
But yes, in person, ideally, of course.
Like an open house or something. I remember lots of lovely evenings that we had.
Yes.
Down at the building.
Yeah. So that's going to be created very soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Dwayne, Esther, and Paris have my contact information. They have my Gmail. Unfortunately, sorry, Dwayne, I was on Egypt time in July, so that's why all the Zoom times were wrong. But I will respond within 1 to 2 days. So whoever needs it, it's yours.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Paul.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.